Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our session on Arctic futures, uh, where we're hoping generation of scientists and policy advocates to address permafrost thaw, land degradation, and climate crisis in the North. So I'd like to invite our panelists up to have a seat in the front of the room. First, we have Grant McDonald from the University of Victoria, and who's here as the ICCI representative. Next, I'd like to invite Hida Lakana, a youth activist and climate educator. Do we have a Hida? Okay. Yeah, lost. Maybe couldn't find the climate cryosphere pavilion. All right, then we have Narazana Batsakan from the University of Mongolia. Also lost. Excellent. That's great news. All right. Then we have Finnur Ricard Anderson, who I think I saw here. All right, great. From Iceland, Icelandic youth, young environmentalist, and UN youth delegate on climate change. And finally, Sharon Gaki, International Consortium on Climate and Biodiversity, Arctic Angel. That's Gustav, not an Arctic Angel. All right. We happen to have a extra small panel now. So I guess while we it's not somebody. Ah, great. Welcome. You made it. I think you're a panelist. I just invited panelists up to the front. I'll just okay. So welcome, panelists. I'd like to take a few minutes for you guys to introduce yourself and share your story on how you became interested in permafrost and Arctic change and addressing climate change.
Hi, everyone. Yes, so my name's Grant MacDonald. Can you hear me okay through the mask? Yeah, okay. Yeah. I'm a postdoc at the University of Victoria in Vancouver Island, and I research sea ice, glaciers, and ice sheets. At the moment in Arctic Canada, but I work in Greenland with Antarctica. I really first became interested in the cryosphere when I went to Iceland. Actually went for a football game to see Scotland versus Iceland. So while we were there, we went to see some glaciers. And I was really struck by how beautiful they were. I hadn't seen anything like that. And then as I got a bit older and I was going to university, the fourth IPCC report had just come out. And climate change was really being talked about more and more. And I wanted to work on something that really seemed like a huge challenge for my generation in particular. So I went to university and studied geography and continued this interest in the cryosphere and glaciers. And since then, I've went on to do a PhD in that work, and I've really gotten to see through my work how the cryosphere affects all different kinds of people all over the world. So the melting of the ice sheets are affecting sea level rise. I worked in Chile and saw how melting glaciers are really important for water resources and how ice affects the whole global climate too through its effect. For example, the loss of sea ice in the Arctic causing more radiation to be absorbed, and really affecting people wherever they are in the world. And that's really a blend with my personal interests too.
Hi everyone, my name is Finnur. I'm from Iceland. I am a climate and environmental justice activist, currently chairing an Icelandic youth environmental NGO. And yeah, I get this question a lot, how I got involved with the climate-related issues, and I don't know myself. It kind of just happened. The interest arose from somewhere, but I have some guesses about where it came from. I think being from Iceland is one of them. and having parents who raised me in a way that made me aware of my surroundings and the importance of nature for our livelihoods. And it's only in the past sort of 2 years that I've come to interact with Arctic issues specifically. Attended some conferences in the Arctic, which has been really eye-opening, and then interacting with indigenous populations especially has been a real pleasure. So my focus hasn't been so much in the Arctic, but I've explored a lot land degradation. So I'm happy that we're sort of looking at Arctic issues in the cryosphere in tandem with land management issues. So I'm just very excited and glad to be here with you all today.
Hi everyone, I'm Heetha. I'm from India, and I've been in the climate environment space for a while. My first talk was COP21, and that's when I got involved in the youth movement. I now co-founded an organization known as the Youth Negotiators Academy, where we work with countries and we train young negotiators for the climate change process. And from next year onwards, also for the UN desertification conventions, the land youth negotiator programs. My interest in cryosphere came a little later in 2018. I was actually interning at the Woodward Climate Research Center, and that's when I worked with Policy Brave on wildfires in the northern high latitude area, and that's when I got more interested. And now we have, of course, been training young negotiators from across 54 countries this year, and some of them also from areas that have permafrost, for example, Mongolia, who will be joining us shortly. So super happy to be here and to be able to support young negotiators from different parts of the world.
Great to have you all. Okay, I have some questions for you, and hopefully there's a bit of discussion also. And I think we have a bit more time now with the smaller panel. Another panelist is on their way. Okay, great. So, starting with Fran, how do you think collaboration between early career scientists and more established researchers can help to increase our understanding of Arctic processes?
Yeah, I think early career researchers and more established researchers really bring their own advantages, and working together is great for research. So, for example, especially in cryosphere work, later career researchers have seen so much change themselves. So, for example, my PhD advisor has been a glaciologist since the 70s, and he's seen huge change in all aspects of glaciology at the poles, mountain glaciers. And I think living, not only I can read about that change, but actually seeing that is hugely valuable in a way that I can't get. So I think that it gives you a perspective that helps plan more research. I think another advantage for more established researchers is the career stability that you have at that stage of your career. So they say in the US, when people have tenure, they have a lot more room to kind of take on riskier projects or more sort of trendy research as a less trendy research. So as a early career researcher, there's a lot of pressure sometimes to get papers out. You have to you don't want to do something that's not going to get a paper, because then you might get another postdoc or you might not get a permanent job. So working together there, you as an early career researcher, you can kind of be part of those less trendy or more risky projects by working together with someone who has that stability. And then I think early career researchers will have often grown up with advances in technology that's maybe later career researchers are less experienced with. So, for example, in our field, working with drones is bringing all sorts of opportunities for research. Younger people now might have a quadcopter, just a drone, just as a hobby, which is really valuable when you bring it into research. There's also a lot of growth in use of machine learning, artificial intelligence, things that people have more experience with now growing up. And I think another thing is the early career research cohort is more diverse now. There's obviously a lot of work to be done, and it's not as diverse as it should be, but it's definitely a more diverse cohort especially I think in our field, if you look at later career researchers, it's really not very diverse. So that brings fresh perspectives and all sorts of advantages to work together. And, yeah, I think about exciting research programs.
So I have a question out of interest, but maybe I should hold it, but I'll ask anyways. So how do you see, as a younger person and early career scientist, how do you see the role of science in informing climate? Like, do you think the science community and this intergenerational aspect, like, are we doing enough? Do you see a role of early career scientists to push and drive the science establishment to doing more?
Yes, yeah, definitely. I don't know. I would probably say enough of not being done. But yeah, I definitely think scientists have that role. I think it's a big part of what we're here doing with the ICCI Pavilion. We're not just presenting the science and saying this is what it is. It says 2 degrees is too high. Well, we're not afraid to say that. I think some people are. I think that is changing and getting better. So yeah, absolutely, I would love to see scientists push more and more.
Welcome.
Sorry. I was at the building 87. Okay, so hello everyone. I'm sorry for being late. I'm Narinzaya from Mongolia, and I'm actually a 4th-year software development student at the National University of Mongolia, so I'm studying IT. And I've been doing some advocacy work on digital communication. So I'm really interested in that area. And they were actually looking for Arctic speakers, but here I am. I'm from Mongolia, but Mongolia is actually ranks at 5th in terms of like frozen ground. So it's like really important for us. And I was actually born in a rural area, in a really mountainous area. And I moved to the city center when I was like 5 years old. Actually, like my parents moved there. And but every year I visit my hometown, and it's just so beautiful. Like there are just many tall buildings, like tall mountains and rivers, and everything is just so breathtaking. And like I'm like literally getting like shakes when I like describing this, because like you have to go there to experience those really great nature. But the problem is that because of climate change, actually there is this salt going on, and it's affecting uh, like uh, reindeer herders in Mongolia, and it's also linked with desertification, drought, flood, and everything is related. But since we have this really big frozen ground, we should definitely protect it. But the problem is that young people don't really know about it, don't really know if that's happening, because we have other issues related to climate change, like air pollution, droughts, desertification, and everything. So, and most of us, actually, we have 3 million people, but almost half of the population lives in the city center. There is a lot of in-migration going on, going from rural area to the city center. So we are not like we are separated from our nature, so we don't see what's actually going on. And it's actually been 3 years since I didn't go to my hometown because of COVID-19, and I was just busy like doing some internship. So like I'm also separated from my hometown. But when I was basically researching, because I was invited as a speaker, then I realized that the problem was actually happening, and it really sparked something in me to disseminate knowledge about it. So what can we do about it? So my I would say we should definitely like initiate these social media campaigns for young people to get to know what's actually happening. That should be based on research, because I know that a lot of researchers are doing amazing job about like what's really happening. So, and I'm pretty sure that like making some short videos and YouTube shorts, Instagram reels, and TikToks, and just like basically, we will like. So here's my idea: we will bring high school students, and we will ask this question. So, do you know what's really happening under the ground? Do you know how much resources that we have, and do you know that it's affecting our lives because of climate change? And I would assume they would know about it, and we will capture the reactions by the students when we tell the all findings of those amazing researchers, quality research. And then it will showcase that young people don't know about that. It will also one way to raise our young people voices to the local communities through the use of social media campaign. I'm sure about it because I've been doing some Instagram reels and beautiful posters on like I got to learn about how to use Adobe Suite like Photoshop, Premiere Pro, Adobe Illustrator, just because I really wanted to let the young people know about what's actually happening. And then it was, I saw that there was this like people who actually got knowledge just because they saw my posts, they saw the reels that I made. So it was really inspiring. So I'm pretty sure if we use the right channels, if we use those TikTok, like Instagram, Facebook platforms for the right cause, then we will definitely create some change. So I'm pretty sure it's important. Okay, thank you.
Good. Actually, so we'll go off script for a minute. How, so the other panelists, what methods do you use to communicate with people? And do you think how important do you think it is to communicate outward to people who are less informed versus to reach toward decision makers? How do you balance that, and do you use different channels? We could start with you, Pizza.
Yeah. Well, so back home in India, I work on climate change education, and for a country like India, the cryosphere is very, very far off. We can't imagine from permafrost, especially when a lot of our country, a lot of our cities are very urban. It's hot, and we really even glaciers are something that you imagine far away. Um, so when we talk about climate change, it has to get very localized, very understandable for the children or the young people that I work with, and then link it to the big picture of what's happening in other parts of the world, how there are other communities living and depending on certain ecosystems, just the way that we depend on the ecosystems that we have. And it looks very different. For example, India, with such a diverse population, speaks multiple different languages, has very different cultures. So if you move out of the urban areas, if you move just slightly outside at the periphery of a city, the realities are very different compared to if you go to rural India. And even in urban India, between the economically sort of upper class versus the socially less benefited class, there is a lot of difference in communication. What I have found most useful is to really try and basically to try and bring their realities and bring it in a way that makes sense to them rather than talking about climate change happening somewhere in some part of the world. And once that connect is made, it is then easier to then link it to other issues in other parts, and then talk about global warming, and then talk about sea ice melting or whatever else that we want to talk about. And when it comes on the other side of things internationally for the Youth Negotiators Academy, our communication is again very, very different because we train young negotiators from all parts of the world. It is a global program. And our communication then looks different when we're talking, for example, to a country because then it focuses on what the benefits are going to be for them, which might most likely be succession planning for the delegation, scaling up capacity, understanding and building skills for members of their own delegation. Two, for example, are the young people who just want to know, like, how can I be a part of this? Or what are the young negotiators doing? So it looks very different in that sense. Two, for example, a partner who has a very different interest in the program for themselves or a donor. So the key for the Youth Negotiators Academy is really to create communication strategies that can resonate with the various audiences that we have. At the same time, with the messaging that we need young people in decision-making roles, for the reason that because a lot of it that Anand has already mentioned, but we do face the realities of what we're talking about, the impacts of climate change, the issues that we're seeing, but that doesn't leave us only in a victim role. That also brings us with a lot of capabilities to actually be there if we have the right training and capacity building to be able to make the change that we need to make and accelerate the change because we are slightly impatient. So really pushing for the change that we need because we haven't seen it for the past 28 years.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting and important question. How do we speak to different audiences? And I think the first step is always recognizing, okay, who do you want to speak to? Who is your audience? And what's the message you want to get across? And I think in my case, with my NGO, for example, our target audiences are the public and the politicians that they vote for. And it's really different how we orient our communication, whether we're talking directly to the public or directly to the decision makers. Because the decision makers are much more likely to focus on, okay, what's the science? What are the facts? And in that regard, science communication is super essential. Whereas when we're talking to the public, their perception of the world around them is very, very different. They're not occupied with the big picture, with big decisions. They're occupied with, what's going to happen tomorrow? What am I going to have for dinner tonight? So you sort of have to meet everyone that you're talking with at their level. Which means that we've tried to sort of sway away from talking purely about the science when communicating with the public and rather meeting them at the emotional level. Because, yeah, as important as it is to talk about carbon budgets that we have to save the cryosphere, people don't respond to science or numbers or statistics as they do to emotions or things that we tell them about how their life is going to change for the worse or for the better, depending on what action we take. So I think climate communication has to be rethought in many places to shift away from the statistics and the numbers and more towards the emotional, more casual day-to-day life communication.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Saw recently a talk by Catherine Keiko, and she was saying she's an American climate change communicator and scientist, that is one of the words. And she was saying that one of the most important things that we could do in the science community was just to have little everyday conversations about climate change and climate change impacts and like climate anxiety and like really just talk about the problem and also talk about how we're trying to solve it. And so, yeah, I think it's the dialogue between people and, meeting them wherever they are is important. Brett, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's essential when we're doing our science that we communicate it similarly to general public and policymakers. It's not if we're writing all these papers, but no one's reading them outside of our little cryosphere community, it's not going to make the effect it should have. And I think it's really important seen as part of the job. A lot of scientists do this in their spare time. I think there needs to be more funding for it to be actually for people to get rewarded for it.
Yes. How do you balance communication when doing your science? Because I've experienced as an career scientist, supervisors that don't appreciate the work of communication and that is entirely done in your own time and you have any space, which is difficult when science often takes up more of your own time. That's on top of that as well. So there's a lot of pressure to publish and produce high quality science. And then now, as early career scientist, I feel a lot of the communication burden gets pushed onto early career scientists as well. And so we're trying to establish ourselves in our career And now we're not only communicating our science, but often our supervisors' science as well. How do you personally manage those aspects?
Yeah, I think we often often expect to do it as well because we think, oh, it's good for our CV. So
Yeah.
lately we're doing, well, I don't think I really have found that comes. I do it, at times I'm burnt out with science and I don't do as much of it. Other times I have more time or supervisors who encourages it more and I get to do more of it. I'm still searching for that.
Yeah, so in my group, I actually have it as a student assistant job. Like it's part of the job to do this. And this is beneficial for me because I'm not so native to a lot of these digital platforms. So I found that that works well. And I would advise others to use similar. So maybe you push forward a little bit. Yes.
You open up the questions?
I have 1 or 2 more questions. So let's do that in about 10 minutes. Maybe a little less. I think your questions might be more interesting. I wanted to ask another question to Finnur about Iceland and how you're positioned there. So how do you see the unique challenges and opportunities that Iceland faces in addressing permafrost thaw and the changing Arctic? And how do you think benefits from and the work that you've done can translate to other places?
Big question. I think, well, in Iceland, we've got the biggest glaciers in Europe. So that's a fact that we need to utilize in our narrative in Iceland. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we're facing when it comes to addressing permafrost policies in Iceland is the fact that the vast majority of our population is very disconnected from these very glaciers that we both depend on for our livelihoods, for irrigation and for hydropower production. So that's the biggest challenge to overcome at first is reestablishing that connection between our population to these glaciers, to these permafrosts. So this is one of the greatest challenges. And then once we've got this back on the agenda, back in people's mind, the important connection between their lives and the glaciers, then we can start thinking about specific policies. So with my NGO currently, we're not really focusing on which specific policies we should be implementing to address the permafrost thaw, but how we can actually get on the agenda to begin with. And I think it's a question of prioritizing because there's so many different policy areas that we have to focus on to address climate change. So glaciers haven't really been at the top of our priority list. And that's because the glaciers themselves might not be such an attractive topic for, as I was saying, the general public, because it doesn't connect to their day-to-day life. So what we've been thinking now more recently is how we can use the narrative of glaciers and their visual impact as a tool, as a vehicle to address the importance of climate policy. So rather than focusing on the importance of climate policy about glaciers, using glaciers as a tool to raise awareness of the importance of any climate policy.
Great. Thanks. Question for Nassano. How has social media and digital connection helped you to mobilize a new generation of climate advocates? And do you think that this could both be effective not only in Mongolia, but also more broadly across the Arctic?
Definitely. Firstly, I think we should think about our target audience because, in my opinion, I don't think like advocating for policymakers in Mongolia wouldn't be that effective. Because I mean, we have policy. We also signed to this declaration to protect permafrost. But the problem is that we have this declaration and policy, but it's not implemented well enough in our country. And we have, as I said before, we have prioritized other issues. And we have the Ministry of Environment and Tourism, but we have this lack of human resource who can address those problems, who actually have time to tackle this issue. So I think for us, I believe for young people, it's important to target those groups who are interested in climate change as general and disseminating more knowledge about permafrost thaw into the greening education. So it's a long term, and I wouldn't see any big impact as like immediate response. But I believe that if we integrate those issues into our syllabus for public education, then in the long term, I would see those young people being change makers, those young people being advocate for those issues. So I believe this long climate education is important. And also on that note about the question she asked, well, I believe like being in research and being in digital communication officer is just so different because like if you sit down and open your laptop and write a post um, on Instagram or Facebook, it just takes so much time. You have to think about the caption, but before that, you have to research about it. You have to like put those statistics, put those posters into something really aesthetically beautiful, so it will catch people's attention. This is just so different. There is this different science behind it. That's why these digital communication officers, those positions are like have these different roles. So I believe like different institutions should definitely have some assistance that's dedicated for digital communication.
Right. Question for Noison. Oh, no. From your experience, what have you found to be the key messages and like most resonant messages with the people that you're working with, the young negotiators?
Well, I think it depends on what context we're talking about, but I think a lot of the times the key messages on the importance of 1.5, for example, or really talking about why we need to have progress every year at the negotiations, and it can't be something that happens 6 months later or at the next call. I think like just pushing that agenda through is a lot easier with young people. We understand the urgency, but they also know then different ways of how they can bring it in their delegations. It may or may not always work because, of course, negotiations are much larger than their individual delegations. But it really creates a sense of the importance of why they're here, the sense of the basically it is a big responsibility that they're bringing into the rooms. But at the same time, we're hoping that through the community that we build, and we're seeing it slowly because we're only in our second year now, but we're seeing it already from last year to this year, that there is a lot more collaboration, especially from our cohort from last year. When you see them this year, they're all sitting in the rooms, some of them in the same negotiating tracks, but on different groups of countries. So there's someone from the Latin American groups, there's someone from the small island states, there's someone from the African group of negotiators. And they've developed their own method of communication, non-verbal communication in the rooms, so that at least they're all on the same page. Like they would look at each other before they make an intervention, and they know a nod is yes, I should go ahead, or what to do, or whether if a hand waves this side, what like. And it's really interesting to see that happen, to see that develop, which means that they're then going back with their groups of countries, coming together and sort of making these alliances. And progress, of course, is happening one meeting at a time, and we don't have it saying this is the draft text that came out because of these 5 people, for example. But to just see that happening in the rooms already from last year to this year is beautiful in itself. And I think this is what also brings, like, it gives me strength to say this year's cohort is so much larger. We have 125 young negotiators here. So I think if you just bring that on by next year, the sense of community, the sense of actually building collaborations is going to, build exponentially by the next few years.
Definitely, because I'm the participant of the program. I'm not like well the thing is I don't work for the government. I'm a youth negotiator. I have the CSO background. So when I like see the familiar faces in the room, I just feel like I belong there. Otherwise, like people have this like very serious face on, and you just feel intimidated. But this sense of belonging is just so important, and it really like helps me with confidence. And I'm really happy to be part of this program. I'm not saying this just because the godmother is saying that initiate. But the thing is, it really actually helps. And I can see that those people will be the next change makers, will be the next policy makers. And I've just learned that it's not about losing or winning in those rooms. It's about finding your ally, because we are living in the same world. And like, I'm not from Arctic, but what's happening in Arctic also is affecting communities in Mongolia and all over the world. So I'm just learning that it's really important for us to collaborate together on national level, on international level as well. And it's just like really broadening of my view. Thank you for the program.
Yeah, I think any kind of program that brings people together in some sort of structured way to address climate change is really important, and really helps, like, this feeling of belonging and connection is really special. So congratulations. So final question, and then I will open it up for questions from the broader audience, and I'd like the whole panel to tackle this. Tell me about COP28 for you, and how has it been going? How have you been finding it? What are key points and messages that have resonated with you? And we just started with you, Narasaya, so let's start on the other side this time with Grant.
Yeah, this is my first COP, so it's been definitely a big experience, kind of overwhelming. I think one of the most interesting things for me is being I've spent a lot of my time at the Cryosphere Pavilion, which everyone should go to, the nature building, and yeah, talking to people from all over the world. I mean, I've lost count of the number of countries that I've spoken to people from, and connecting the Cryosphere to wherever they're from. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about where it's more obvious, where there are mountain glaciers or some of the more famous low-lying areas. But every person who's come, we can always find a way to connect the Cryosphere to them and how important, whether it's global climate systems, sea level rise, water resources, all those kinds of things. So that's been really great for me to see that. I haven't got to see too many of the negotiations, so I don't really know too well how that's going. But yeah, it's hopefully we're helping to contribute to this real push for 1.5.
We can pair you with some of our negotiators if you feel a little bit much.
Yeah, I like that point that hits me. The cryosphere really affects everyone. That's really an important message to hear on my end. Finnar?
Yeah, this is my third COP. I started in Glasgow, then I was in Egypt last year, and I've been to the intersessional negotiations in Bonn twice as well. So it's been many days, many long days at conferences like this. And then what I've come to realize is that COPs are an important decision-making space. We need to use it, but we're never going to achieve everything we need to achieve at the COPs. And I think that's the main message that I try to send back to my country is that, okay, let's set our goals high. Let's have our hopes moderate for the COPs. Let's try our best. But what really matters isn't necessarily the decisions that are made here, but what the governments do when they get back to their own countries. So there's lots I could say about everything that's going on at COP and how little progress we've made so far, or what outcomes I expect. But I think the most important message is, whatever happens here, we need to do so much more other forums outside COPs, both on a national level, but also when it comes to other forms of international agreements, other forms of international cooperation. And I've just listened to the press conference of the COP presidency this morning, and the theme was finance, because today's COP theme is finance. And the work that's being done on reforming the international finance structure is just incredible, and I'm really hopeful for the impact that that's going to bring. So that's an example of another decision-making space that is also important. So yeah, I think that would be my most interesting takeaway from all these COPs.
Yeah, I think I would start with the same point that he's ended on. I think it's a lot of what we do once we're out of the COP is what is going to see whether the COP was, well, effective or whether the decision was effective, because we have a Paris Agreement, but it now goes to the implementation. If we're able to implement it, then the Paris Agreement was actually an agreement that we've valued and we've actually stood by. But if not, then it's just an agreement on paper. It doesn't change anything at all. So a lot of it actually goes back, and this is now my 12th UNFCCC negotiation session, SVs and COPs included. And for the past couple of years, I've actually not been able to go in the rooms because we're out supporting the negotiators that are in the rooms. This year specifically, I've been meeting with our heads of delegations. I look after all our country relations and the cohorts, meeting the cohort and all the countries that we work with, to understand their opinion and their feedback on the program in particular, but then also what we can do or like support them better inside the rooms. And I think now that the high level segment is over is when everyone's finally getting their like brain power together to focus on the more technical stuff. So let's see. Well, I'm always slightly hopeful, but I hope that it doesn't, like, I hope I can remain that way by the end of next week. So let's see. I think each year when I come into a COP, I come with like renewed hope, but then sometimes it doesn't end the same way. So let's see where it goes this time.
So for me, it's my first COP, and it's been very overwhelming. And when you get to the negotiation rooms, English is not my first language, it's not even my second language. And like it's going live, right? But you can't catch the words. And the funny thing is, I was in the room when the opening of the COP was happening, and I was on my phone on Instagram to post something about what's happening on my social media account of my NGO. Then I couldn't catch it, and I opened BBC application, and they were like broadcasting the opening live, and I catch the quote that I was looking for. But yesterday I was at the networking event, and there were three ladies talking, and I came to them and I was just introducing myself, and I asked what they do, and they said they were the BBC reporters. It was just so fun, like to see all the people that I admire, because I was thinking like who are what people are behind BBC or what team is working, and I got to meet them. That's the one magic of COP, of course. And secondly, I'm just thinking about have to showcase what's happening here to the local community in Mongolia, because they don't really care about COP28 actually. And even if some people know about it, like how important that is, they don't think that they kind of lost hope because the government actually like don't know anything about it. We met our head of the delegation just before the opening of COP, and it was our first time meeting our delegation. But we don't have any clear idea what negotiation track that we are following, because there is anyone in the delegation team who know about what's happening at COP and why it's important to us. There is, as I said before, there is a lack of human resource in my country. But the fact that we are many steps ahead, that we can see the gaps in the system, that how the government is working, is just so incredible. And it's because of the climate youth negotiator program, because I can see that all the governments are doing well, and I can also see that we are not alone, because there are other countries also, like other negotiators facing the same problem that we are facing. So it's just so incredible to see like how it's going on at the big in a bigger picture. And we had the meeting with the minister of Mongolia yesterday. We had a lunch, and he asked us to become advisor to the minister, so we could follow him on negotiations for other side deals, not just COP. So it's been incredible, like maybe I'm 21 years old and being an advisor. Like if he actually make his promises, then that would be great. And I just, it's not for like personal ambition, but it's for the cause, for the contribution to my country. So thinking about it, I'm just learning lots of things, and just like being in the room just matters a lot.
Thank you. All right, audience questions. I don't have one in the back.
Hi.
Ashley, would you mind Dan, sure, so if the microphone catches you a bit
Okay, my name is Þórunn, I come from Iceland. The first COP I went to was number 6. I had to go. And then I remember people talking about the permafrost, saying, oh, if anything happens to the permafrost, then we're in trouble. And it was like into the future kind of a debate, a little bit about the glaciers as well at the turn of the century. So I would really like to congratulate you on putting the biosphere here on the agenda. And I know that my country is playing a part in that. But we also know that the science has gone from strength to strength in the last years. So I would like to ask you a political question. How do you react to the comments made by the president of COP28, which were in the media yesterday or the day before, about the fact, or he said basically something to the point that there is no science between fossil fuel phase out, because we are all probably like-minded people and want to do the right thing in this small gathering here, but we are fighting the giants.
Yeah.
And the giants are in fossil fuel. So how do you react to that, and how do you suggest we react as a community? Thank you.
If I may, I'm not a scientist, so I'm going to take the lead because I think scientists are a little bit sometimes very, they want to be sure of what they're saying because that's how science works. And I think this is where the issue arises because science speaks in terms of likelihoods, it speaks in terms of probabilities, it speaks in terms of where even if you're 99% sure something will happen, you're not going to say, oh, this is going to happen, because that's not how science communicates. And I think this is where the issue arises because for the rest of the world, if you're 45% sure this is going to happen, people are going to say, oh, this is going to happen. And which means that if you're 1% unsure that fossil fuels and climate change have a disconnect, people are going to harp on that 1% and make it sound like that's the 99%. And this is unfortunately the gap in the type of communication. The scientists are trying to communicate something, but they say it with a level, the language is different than what the public perceives it to be. So even the IPCC, if you read the IPCC reports, it says it's likely or it's very likely or the whole level. And for a normal person, when I read my first IPCC report back in 2015, the urgency doesn't come through until I go back and then I Googled what likely or what that means and sort of understood what the implication of each word was. So I think what I'm trying to say is that we just, as a community that believes in this, and as people who are from the field of science, I think we need to be slightly more aggressive in our communications, and we need to stand up and say that just we need to actually push for what we know, because we know that is the truth. And today we're seeing impacts of climate change. It is not back in the 1990s and we're saying, oh, this might happen. We're seeing it happen as of today. So I think really coming together as a very strong community and saying this is what we know is going to happen. Just because we don't have the 100% evidence doesn't mean it's not correct. And I don't know how we do that, but we just need to get slightly more forthright and out there and saying that you can say all you want, but we've proven time and again that we're going down a path of no return, and we're literally now just saying that, oh, this path is actually maybe not the best path. But that's yeah.
Yeah, I guess I can add to that it's incredibly concerning that this comment was made, and it's very inconsistent with the narrative that the presidency has been building up in the lead up and at this COP. So it's very confusing to me and lots of the people why they have such conflicting messages. Where I draw my hope from is the fact that this comment was made on the 21st of November. So there's been, 2 weeks since then, and narrative of the presidency has shifted since then. So I'm hoping that this is a message of the past, that they've moved past this incredible nonsense. And I think I also seek hope from the fact that, there's other people in positions of political leadership who do believe that fossil fuel phase out is the way to go. So you're right, it is the giants who largely have this opinion, but at the same time, there's also lots of political leadership and from the other direction. We see that with the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. There's 10 countries that have already signed up to that. 2 of them are oil-producing states. So I think we're making great progress on the opposite side as well. And I hope also that the presidency reason why they've changed their narrative in the past few days is because they know that their reputation in global politics depends on good outcomes from COP. So I think they've seen that it's not only in the interest of the global common good, but also in their own personal interest to actually stop sending mixed signals and stick to the science.
I think many scientists in my field are quite happy to say that it's simply wrong and the science doesn't support what he said. We're talking a lot about here about the difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees. I mean, 1.5 is already too high, but there is a big difference between 1.5 and 2. And the report that we're pushing and showing at the pavilion is that 2 degrees is too much, and we need to keep it at 1.5, and keeping at 1.5 is simply incompatible with what we said.
Yes. I have people in emergency medicine. Oh, sorry. I don't think my phones are recording, so I don't.
Okay, hi. I'm Gail Kupos. I'm an emergency medicine physician. Yesterday was the first Health Day at COP, which was very exciting. Has this been a conversation where you guys are from? Is this part of the messaging that is coming through in your countries? And has this been something that has been related back to the changes the cryosphere is experiencing?
The effects of cryosphere, loss of cryosphere on health. I think not that directly that often, like using the word health, but I think everything we're talking about affects health. The effects of sea ice on the global climate system and it being too hot is going to affect people's health. We talk about the effect on the oceans and how that affects ecosystems and food supply, water resources, very direct hazards, for example, glacier lake outburst floods wiping out villages and killing people. So I don't often hear the word health directly used in, but I think everything we're talking about is connected.
Yeah, perhaps I can add that, you know, I'm very happy that health is now for the first time sort of put on the agenda, even if it's not on the agenda, but just a thematic day. And there was an agreement that on health, which was helpful, although it's not a negotiated text. But I think health is a powerful tool again as a way of building an effective narrative on pushing for climate policy. Because in the end, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about meeting people where they're at, and then people in the end care about their own health and their well-being. So if we can demonstrate to those who don't think about climate change on a day-to-day basis, if we can communicate to them the fact that, you know, phasing out fossil fuels or electrifying our transport is a matter of health and not just a matter of climate change, I think we can build up a bigger coalition of people who are willing to help us push for climate policy. So yeah, health is definitely an important thing that we need to add to the narrative, even if it's not so much being included currently.
So in the Prime Minister of Iceland's speech, he did mention the right to a healthy environment in her speech and said that was a priority. So it's becoming talked about in Iceland.
Okay, I'm gonna pause for a minute. We have our final panel member. I'd like to invite you up here to introduce yourself and then join the rest of our discussion. Have your final movement.
Thanks so much. I'm so sorry I'm late. I got lost coming at the end. And so my name is Sharon Gaki. I'm from Kenya. I'm an activist and I'm from now. I have to be international. It stands for International Research on Climate and Biodiversity. And I'm also an active angel with that. And I'm also an Arctic angel with that with Global Choices, which are Arctic angels. Basically, what we do is we do advocate for the protection of Antarctic ice sheet.
How did you get into this role that you have now?
So me getting to Arctic angels.
What's your story behind your activism? How did you find your voice?
Well, thank you. So I come from a pastoral community, which is in Kenya, which has been affected mostly by the impact of climate change. Speaking of impacts of climate change, I've been seeing droughts come and sweep away all our livestock, and we don't have anything else left behind. Our parents doesn't have like any other money to take our children back to school because this is their source of income. Also, if we are not speaking of drought, we are speaking of floods, like it's currently happening right now as I'm speaking here back at home. People are being carried away by the floods, their homes being swept away. So I thought, how can I help my community advocate for this? So I got myself into activism, where I teach my community on how to do sustainable ways of income. Which one of them it's through climate smart agriculture, whereby they don't have to depend for rains, and when it's time for drought, they can still produce their own food, which is agro food, and they can make income out of it. Most of them they're doing agribusiness out of it. And myself getting into Arctic Angels is I knew like whatever happens in the Arctic, it doesn't stay in the Arctic. It is also as a form of whatever we are going through in Africa, whereby when the ice is melted, it is causing the increase of water and oceans back at home in Indian Ocean and our lakes as well. And at the same time, it is which serves as the reflection of light back to the space. It is not doing so. That's why we are experiencing more drought than it has ever happened in the 40 years time.
So one question we asked all the panelists, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you now. Tell us about your experience at COP. Is this your first one? What's been meaningful and interesting for you? What key take-home messages have you had so far?
So this is not my first COP. This is my second COP, and I would say what I've not seen so far is inclusion of youth in negotiations, myself negotiation rooms, and what I would love to see is that these youth being trained and given the spaces, the time also, and being trained on how to do the negotiations, working in the negotiation rooms. Like right now, this year I was privileged to have a party overflow badge, so I've been able to walk into the negotiation rooms and see what goes through there. And myself being in the negotiation rooms, being my first time into negotiation rooms, I'm learning so much, and at the same time I can't contribute because I don't have that chance to contribute. I feel like I have something to contribute as a young person, but I'm not given that chance. So I would like to see like youth being engaged more into negotiation room, and also being given a chance to be among the country delegates, because like giving an example with one of the countries delegation that came in, most of them were the government delegates alone, and so many youth wanted to be among the delegation of the country, but they were not able to because they didn't have funding. So if most of the youth are funded to be at these kind of spaces where negotiations are being made and decisions are being made, the future belongs to the youth currently, and they're up to them to make this future work for them and the generations to come. So if these youth are not given chance right now to do it, then it's not going to be rightful for the aged people doing it over and over again, and without impacting or passing it over to the young people.
We're having audience questions before. Do we have more questions, please?
Yeah, hi, I'm Carrie Nichols. I'm with an organization called Ocean Visions, and I am wondering what those of us who have aged out of early career or youth can do to support you.
I can start, and then I think my colleagues come in. I think you don't need to be youth to support you, and that's I think the first step of. I think it's also probably also just the way that the narrative around youth movements have been, and we're probably creating an exclusionary movement of sorts. But I strongly believe, and especially with the Youth Negotiators Academy, our tagline is intergenerational climate justice. We're working with people across age groups because we need the wisdom, the knowledge, the expertise that comes from age and from experience and just from being here. And then channeling that with the passion, the enthusiasm, the sort of energy that young people have to make the right mix that we need. So I think whatever your expertise might be, whether it is in science, whether it is in policy making, whether it is whatever that might be, There is a lot that we can do together. There's always gaps and places that we can fill to ensure that we can get the most or we can get the best possible out of this scenario. Because currently we don't have there is no perfect fix. So how do we move towards something that we can say this is perfect for now and then build up on it later on? So there's always, I think whatever that might be, right, from just knowledge sharing to training to capacity building to just time that you can have to help sort of mentor somebody to whatever that might look.
And the fact that you're also asking this question is that means that 50% of work is done.
Yeah.
Actually, in my delegation here and older generation in my country, they don't ask this question. They don't think that they could learn from us. There is this ageism also going on sometimes, but still the fact that you're asking, I really appreciate it. Just wanted to add that.
Any last comments?
I suppose that just in terms of doing research, I think one of the main things that later career researchers can do is sort of recognize the precarious position earlier for researchers are put up in, which affects our research, and kind of listening on that. And sometimes we need someone who has a more sort of stable and secure job to maybe say something that we.
So, hi, my name's Hilfura. I'm from Iceland. And thank you for this panel, by the way. It's really interesting to hear your perspectives, especially I was thinking about, how we convey information and going on from this idea of with the scientific language and how we convey that maybe in a stronger sense or with more urgency to then get people to connect more to the urgency of the situation. And I just wanted to hear a little bit your input put on, because my feeling is with this conversation, as you get older, you lessen this kind of state of emergency in your mind, like your connection with something being an emergency maybe lessens a little bit with age. Because we've been through a lot of emergencies, and usually I come to, especially I'm talking more, from my perspective, from like Western civilization. I feel a lot with the conversation, especially with older people, is that, we're maybe blowing this a little bit out of proportion, and then when you speak with urgency, people have a tendency to maybe not react to that in a good way. Like it actually it sets them back a little bit. Like they reject it more if you speak in too much of an emergency language with it. Like they think this is just, I'm not going to take this seriously. So it's actually a really difficult balance to make in the way that we talk about climate change. And I think it's really interesting, Tim, that you're talking about connecting it to people's day-to-day lives, all of this stuff. And it's not really a question, it's more kind of just a reflection of what you were talking about, and if you have any more input into that, because I think this is actually one of the most important things, is how do we convey the message? And I think it should be different with the generations, like with young people, how you message, and the older generations. It's not the same ways, so it's, but it's important that we do it correctly to get more people on board. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess there's two things that I think apply here. The first is the balance that you're mentioning. I think, or when I speak about climate change, I always try to convey two things. Firstly, it's that it's an emergency, and secondly is that we can still avoid the worst impacts and there's positive benefits alongside. So always having both messages conveyed at the same time to make sure that people both feel the urgency and the hope at the same time. And the second thing is, I think the main thing we're missing is political leadership on conveying the emergency message. And I think it's really important for that message to come from figures that people look up to. And if I don't know how to answer as to how we engage that leadership more, but I think that's something that we need more everywhere.
Yeah.
Maybe I can also comment on that. I think climate change issue is something that has not been been being spoken on about for so many years now, until recently when it has become so popular and most of the people have the time to speak about it. So if climate change is taken as a maybe as a subject or as a topic in school and being taught in school, so that when our kids are growing up, they are aware of the climate change, the impacts, and how to curb the impacts of the climate change. So I think it's also something else that can help the upcoming generations as well. Yeah. Yeah, I also believe that it's important to meet people where they're at. It's really important, but it's just so difficult. And for young people, for example, like if we get to talk with other people, they see us really inexperienced. But the thing is, we also communicate with different languages with each other, so they don't understand our language. So this is completely different. And then from the older generation's perspective, they don't see that only young people know what we are experiencing. Our lived experiences are different than theirs, but they fail to acknowledge that because it also adds burden to them. And especially for younger generation, we are experiencing climate anxiety at its highest level. And maybe I would say maybe the older generations are reluctant to also like take the burden of those problems. So we have this like on separate levels, but at the same time, also in terms of doing advocacy work using digital communication, I'm just really starting to think how we could connect the researchers, how we could connect the crisis of climate change into the to local community. So it's just so difficult, and I would say I still haven't found the answer. But the fact that I'm like seeing those separate types of communications, and the fact that we are not communicating well with each other, it's something we could address in the upcoming years, hopefully.
I just a couple of resources that I think are really helpful is Catherine Haywood's book, which is Saving Us, and then Ed Maybach with the George Mason Institute. He is like a science communicator. That is his whole area of research, and his thing is always like you want to be really concise. So climate change is this huge overarching problem that touches everything. And that is so overwhelming to communicate to a person. And so you can find one piece that is relevant to the person or audience that you're speaking to. And then kind of what Vinner was saying is giving them hope, but then also giving them action. Because you want to empower people to act on their hope and to feel involved in the solution. And we get this a lot in medicine, right? Which is like you tell someone like this is your diagnosis, but you don't stop there. You're like, these are the things that we can do. And like this is the way that we can help you through this and you provide them with support. And I think that is very similar here.
Yeah. So we only have a few minutes left. You guys are a fantastic panel, incredibly inspiring, very well spoken. Do you want to leave us, each of you, with a few last words and last thoughts? We could start here with you, Sharon, if you're ready.
So to me, I would say I would give a perspective of the Antarctica. So about since 1970 to date, the glaciers that has melted is about 3 trillion tons. And I tend to ask myself, are we going to save glaciers at this point? But unfortunately, if we continue the burning of fossil fuels. The fossil fuels is not only in production of coal, gas, and oil. It is also in the one-use plastics we are doing, fibers that we are keeping on going everywhere. And it will take each and every person of us to save the glacier. The glacier melting is not only affecting people in the north, the Atlantic zone, it is affecting everyone in the world. The fires in Australia, the floods in Uganda, the droughts in Kenya, the waves in Spain. It is affecting each and every person of us. Everybody is being affected.
And for us to save them, we have to all work together. And I'm appealing to anyone who has this information. We all work together to save our one planet, our Mother Earth. Thank you.
I would say putting young, like future generation at the center is important because we won't see immediate results by just like organizing those channels, by doing more other researches, advocating to local community because this climate change issue is just so complex. It's just not a technical one. It's like very big adaptive challenge. So we have to like think of our well-being first. And like the fact that we are in this room together, that means that we are like building in some sort community in some sort. So we should have our own support system, which this climate change use negotiator program like has. It's such a good practice, and we should have it more often. Find people who care about the problem as you care, and even like in the times of failures, in the times of you are discouraged, connect with them, have some conversation about it, and there's this your comfort zone where you can get your energy. So just like having this community and thinking of your well-being first, you're the one who's gonna make contribution to this problem because we all have the privilege because we are in this room. That means that we know something about the permafrost, the frozen underground, what's happening. So we should take care of ourselves. So it's just so important for us to like have this long term thinking, and just what you are doing, maybe the older generation will thank us for what we are doing. So just look at the bright side, I would say.
Yeah, I think my final message would be to just continue doing what we're doing and not give up, because I think giving up is not an option right now. There is a lot of pushback, but I think the community is growing, and we're definitely going to be able to do something if we stick together and sort of push for it. So yeah, I think that's my final message. And through the process, of course, we need to look after ourselves because this is a marathon. So self-care, well-being is very important, and then looking after each other so that we can build that sense of togetherness as we're doing this.
I think the one thing we need is action, real action that reduces emissions. And my view of the thing that's preventing real action and more ambitious action is countries acting in self-interest. So my call would be to those who are most responsible, which are the Western countries, and I call on them to practice more empathy with those who are experiencing the worst impacts, and waking up to the fact that private interest is a very short-term thinking, and that it's in the best interest of everyone, including the Western countries, to act in favor of the global public good.
Yeah, I'll just say again, the cryosphere affects everyone in the world, no matter where you are, how close you actually are to ice. And that we can really, there's a lot being lost, but there is so much that can still be saved. And I'll say that, as scientists, we are human beings as well, and we really care about this. And so if we can use our science to help anyone in their activism or putting that message out, speak to us and someone or through the ICCI or whoever.
Okay, thank you all very much. You're fantastic.